I didn't notice the moment they removed me. That's the part that still makes my chest feel tight, the way something so important disappeared without a sound, no alert, no vibration, no "you've been removed from" anything, just quiet. At first I thought I was imagining it. Life had been noisy that week, work stress, bills stacking up, the ordinary weight of being the dependable one in a family that had learned to lean on me like a crutch. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes the way I used to. So when my screen stayed empty, I blamed myself. Maybe everyone was just busy. Maybe no one had anything interesting to share, but the days kept passing, and the silence stayed. That family group chat had always been loud. Too loud sometimes. My phone used to buzz like it was alive. Photos of my niece with a missing tooth, my brother arguing about politics at 1 a.m., my mother sending blurry pictures of groceries, asking if the tomatoes looked too ripe. It was messy. It was annoying. It was ours. Then one morning I woke up and realized something I hadn't felt in years. Lonely. Not the dramatic kind you post about. Not the kind that comes with tears and sad music. This was quiet loneliness, the kind that creeps in when you realize nobody has asked how your day went. Nobody has sent you anything that didn't require something in return. I unlocked my phone and stared at the home screen. No family notifications. I opened the messaging app, scrolling slowly, like maybe I just missed it. But the group was gone. Not buried, not muted, gone. I felt that strange heat rush to my face, embarrassment mixed with disbelief. I even searched the group name, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. Nothing. My first thought wasn't anger, it was worry. Did I do something wrong? I replayed every conversation from the past month. That time I told my sister I couldn't lend her money again. The moment I asked my brother to finally repay what he owed me. The quiet way my mother had changed the subject when I brought up my own plans for once. I told myself I was overthinking. Families don't just cut people off like that, I thought. Not without saying something. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more I noticed how much I used to exist in that space. I'd open my phone out of habit during lunch. Nothing. I'd finish work and reach for it. Nothing. Days turned into a week, a whole week without a single family message, and that's when it stopped feeling accidental. I began to see pieces of their lives from the outside. A coworker casually mentioned seeing my brother post a big family dinner on social media. Another friend tagged my sister in photos from a birthday party I hadn't heard about. They were together, just not with me. The realization settled in slowly, like dust after a door slams. Heavy, unavoidable, impossible to pretend you don't feel it in your lungs. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I told myself they were just busy. That I'd text later. That I didn't want to seem needy. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid that if I asked, I'd hear something I couldn't unhear. So I stayed quiet. And in that quiet, something in me shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't part of the noise. I was on the outside. And I had no idea that the silence wasn't a mistake, it was a decision. Silence changes you. That's the first thing I learned. At first, I'd just stare at my phone the way people stare at doors that used to open for them, waiting, expecting movement that never came. I'd tell myself I was being dramatic, that I was a grown woman, not a teenager desperate for group chat approval. But the truth was, the group chat had been more than noise. It was proof that I existed to them, that I was included, that I mattered enough to be annoyed by. When that proof disappeared, I started questioning everything else. I noticed how conversations with my family became strangely private. My mother didn't call anymore. She'd text instead, short messages that looked like they'd been typed with one eye on the clock. My sister replied in single sentences. My brother stopped answering altogether unless I followed up. It felt like talking to people through frosted glass. You can see shapes, you can tell someone's there, but nothing is clear enough to touch. Some nights I'd lie awake replaying tiny moments I'd brushed off before, the way they'd all gone quiet when I mentioned taking a job in another city, the awkward smiles when I talked about saving for my own place, the half-jokes about how I was the responsible one, said with that tone that makes responsibility feel less like a compliment and more like a leash. I wondered if I'd become a background character in my own family. No, worse. I wondered if I'd become an obstacle. I didn't ask. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that person who demands reassurance. I told myself I was stronger than that, independent, grown, but strength is easier to perform than to live. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything broke open. I was at work, halfway through pretending to listen in a meeting, when my phone vibrated on the table. I glanced down without thinking, expecting another work email, another calendar reminder. Instead, I saw it. Family Circle added you. My heart actually skipped. Not metaphorically, my chest jerked, like my body was trying to sit up inside itself. They added me back. Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no hey, sorry about that, just back in. The chat exploded the moment I opened it. Messages stacked on top of each other, too many to read at once. My fingers hovered, unsure where to start, like someone stepping into a room after a fire. Everything familiar but wrong. Then I saw my brother's message. We need you. It's serious. Not hello, not how are you, not sorry we vanished. We need you. The words burned. I could feel it, that old instinct waking up, the part of me that had spent years fixing, covering, smoothing, stepping in whenever something fell apart. My first reaction was to reply immediately. What's going on? Is everyone okay? What do you need? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the week of silence. Maybe it was the way my chest still felt hollow from being erased without explanation. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the kind that finally makes you pause before you set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled up. The chat loaded slowly, like it didn't want me to see what had been happening while I was gone. At first it looked normal. Jokes, photos, updates. Then I noticed something strange. My name. It appeared a lot, too much. I started reading more carefully, the way you read a room when you sense something is off. My sister complaining about how someone always acts better than the rest of us. My brother posting a long rant about how some people think they're too good for the family now. Someone. Some people. But every sentence pointed at me like a finger that wouldn't stop accusing. Then it got worse. They weren't just venting, they were dissecting me. How I'd changed. How I'd forgotten where I came from. How I was selfish for focusing on my own life. I scrolled and scrolled, my throat getting tighter with every line. They weren't wondering where I was. They weren't confused about my silence. They were relieved. My mother had sent a message that made my hands go cold. She said it was probably for the best that I wasn't in the group anymore, because I was too sensitive and always took things the wrong way. Too sensitive. After they removed me without a word. After years of being the one they came to whenever something broke, emotionally, financially, practically, I kept scrolling, unable to stop, like I was watching myself be taken apart in public. My sister joked about how I'd finally stopped acting like the family manager. My brother said I was acting like I didn't need them anymore, so why should they keep explaining things to me? The chat wasn't cruel in the obvious way, it was casual. That was the part that hurt the most. This wasn't rage, it wasn't even anger, it was convenience. They talked about me the way people talk about furniture that's been moved out of the room. A little awkward at first, then easier once the space is free. I sat there in the meeting, my coworkers laughing about something I couldn't hear anymore, while my entire understanding of my family rewrote itself in real time, and then I saw the message that explained everything. My brother again. Okay, enough drama. Let's just add her back. We actually need her right now. Need. Not miss. Not want. Need. That was the moment the silence finally made sense. They hadn't removed me because I'd done something unforgivable. They removed me because I wasn't useful anymore. Not until they needed something fixed. I didn't cry. That's what surprised me the most. I'd always imagined that betrayal would come with tears, loud, messy ones that make your throat ache and your head pound. But as I sat there with my phone glowing in my hands, my face stayed dry. What I felt was heavier than sadness. It was like something settled inside me, something solid and immovable. Not rage, not grief, clarity. The meeting ended. People pushed back their chairs, gathered their laptops, made jokes about lunch plans. I nodded when someone spoke to me, even smiled once, but my body was on autopilot. My mind was still inside that group chat, tracing the outlines of conversations that had taken place without me, about me. I walked back to my desk and locked my screen, afraid I'd look again and somehow make it worse. But I didn't need to open the app anymore. The words were already burned in. All afternoon I kept noticing little things I'd ignored for years, patterns I'd never named because naming them would have required me to accept what they meant. I was the one who paid for groceries when my mother was short this month, the one who covered school supplies for my sister's kids, the one who lent my brother money with the quiet understanding that I'd never see it again. And I'd done it gladly, not because they asked, but because I'd built my identity around being needed, around being the reliable one, the one who didn't complain, didn't cause problems, didn't make anyone uncomfortable by wanting too much. Now I understood something I'd never had the language for before. They didn't remove me because I was distant. They removed me because I was inconvenient. My independence had started to feel like disobedience. That night I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling like it might explain everything to me if I looked long enough. I kept thinking about how easily they'd written me out of their shared life, how the chat had kept going, full of jokes and plans and everyday noise, while I sat in silence telling myself they were busy. The worst part wasn't what they said, it was how normal it sounded. They weren't villains in their own story. In their version of things, I wasn't the woman who had spent years holding everyone together. I was the one who had changed, who had drifted, who had forgotten her place. And maybe that was the real betrayal. Not that they talked about me, but that they rewrote me. I picked up my phone again, this time deliberately, and reopened the group chat. The message count at the bottom was climbing. New jokes, new updates, someone sharing a video I didn't even watch. No one had noticed my silence. No one had said my name, until my brother did again. "Are you there?" It was such a small question, so ordinary, the kind you'd answer without thinking on any other day. But I couldn't bring myself to type a single word. I imagined what they expected, the old version of me sliding back into place, asking what was wrong, offering help, pretending I hadn't seen anything that would change how I moved through the world from now on. I thought about replying. I saw everything. I even typed it once, just to see how it looked on the screen. Then I deleted it, because suddenly I realized something else. Explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are is a kind of surrender, and I wasn't ready to give them that. Instead, I went for a walk. No destination, no music, just the sound of my own steps, the city moving around me like it always had, indifferent to whatever was breaking open inside my chest. I passed families laughing on restaurant patios, couples arguing softly on street corners, people living entire lives that had nothing to do with the mess in my phone. For the first time in years, my family wasn't the center of my universe. They were a thread I was learning how to loosen. I realized that everything I'd read in that chat had done something to me that couldn't be undone. It had stripped away the story I'd been telling myself, that loyalty was always returned, that love was proven by how much you gave. What I saw instead was this. They loved the version of me that made their lives easier. They didn't love the version of me who needed space, or respect, or understanding. By the time I got home, my phone was vibrating again. Missed calls now, short messages from my sister. "Can you please respond? It's important. We wouldn't add you back for nothing." I stared at those words for a long time. We wouldn't add you back for nothing. That's when I finally felt it. Not sadness, not anger, but a strange, quiet grief for the woman I'd been an hour ago. The one who would have rushed to help without asking what it would cost her. She was still inside me, but she wasn't in charge anymore. I didn't reply that night. I placed my phone face down on the table, like I was asking the world to wait, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be understood, I was trying to understand myself. Morning came the way it always does, quietly, without asking if you're ready. The light crept in through the edges of my curtains, painting thin gold lines across the walls, like someone trying to stitch the room back together after a long night. I lay there longer than usual, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to touch my phone. I already knew what I'd find. That sense of being needed doesn't vanish just because you stop responding. It adapts. It becomes louder. It starts to knock. When I finally reached for it, my screen lit up with a small storm of notifications. My sister again. My brother. Even my mother, who rarely texted unless something was wrong. I didn't open anything at first. I just watched the screen, feeling that familiar tug inside me, the reflex that said, "Answer, fix it, make it better." It was strange how strong that reflex still was. Even after everything I'd read, I made coffee instead. The kitchen smelled like something solid, something real, dark, bitter, grounding. I held the mug in both hands like it might steady me, like the heat could soak into places that had gone cold overnight. Only then did I open the messages. They were short at first. "Hey, call me when you see this. We need to talk." Then they grew more detailed, more urgent. Please don't do this right now. It's really not a good time for silence. I don't think you understand how serious this is. I let the words sit there, unanswered, while I drank my coffee and stared out the window. The street below was waking up, someone walking a dog, a neighbor unlocking their car, a delivery truck rumbling past like nothing in my life had shifted off its axis. But everything had. I realized that this was the first time I'd ever truly waited on my family, instead of the other way around. I'd always been the one who responded within minutes, sometimes seconds. The one who rearranged plans, canceled evenings, made space. Now the space was mine, and they didn't know what to do with it. By mid-morning, the tone of the messages changed. My brother stopped sounding annoyed and started sounding uneasy. My sister sent a voice note I didn't play. My mother wrote something that made my stomach twist before I even opened it. "You're hurting people by not responding." Hurting. The word landed in me like it always had, not as an accusation, but as a summons. I'd been trained my whole life to flinch at that word, to treat it as a personal emergency, but this time I noticed something else. Not one of them had said they were sorry. Not one of them had asked how I was feeling. Not one of them had acknowledged the week of silence, the things I'd read, the way I'd been erased and discussed like a problem they were glad to be rid of. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because something had gone wrong. Around noon, I finally listened to my sister's voice note. Her voice sounded thin, stretched tight, like she was holding herself together with effort. She said my name first, my real one, the way she only used it when she wanted something from me. Then she launched into explanations without pausing to breathe, something about money, about paperwork, about how they didn't know who else to ask. She didn't mention the group chat. She didn't mention what they'd said. It was like none of it had happened. I replayed the note twice, trying to hear anything beneath the panic, any hint of remorse, any awareness that something precious had cracked open between us. There was nothing. By the afternoon, I started to feel something unfamiliar settling into my bones. Patience. Not the performative kind, not the smiling through it patience I'd perfected over the years. This was slower, heavier. It didn't rush me anywhere. It let me exist without being useful. I went for another walk. I passed the same cafe I'd rushed past 100 times on my way to fix someone else's problem. This time I went in. I ordered something indulgent, something I didn't justify as a quick break or a reward for being productive. I just wanted it. I sat alone at a small table by the window, watching people hurry by, each of them carrying invisible stories that had nothing to do with mine. And I thought about the version of me my family knew, the woman who had always been there, always been available, always been ready. They'd mistaken availability for identity. They'd never bothered to ask who I was when I wasn't solving something. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my brother calling. I let it ring, not out of spite, not to punish anyone, but because I was finally listening to the part of me that had been whispering for years, the part that had been drowned out by obligation and loyalty and fear of being the difficult one. The whisper said, "You don't owe them your silence, but you don't owe them your voice either." I imagined what would happen when I finally did respond. How quickly they'd fill the space with their urgency, their needs, their version of events. How easily the story would shift back to how I was overreacting, how I was making things harder than they needed to be. And I understood something that made my hands tremble slightly around my coffee cup. If I answered now, I'd be stepping back into a role I was no longer sure I wanted. So I waited. Not because I was strong, but because I was finally tired of being small. By evening, my phone had gone from asking to demanding. The vibration patterns changed. That sharp, insistent buzz that feels like someone knocking on a locked door with their shoulder. Missed calls stacked up in neat little rows, my brother's name appearing so many times it looked like a dare. I watched the screen light up from across the room while I folded laundry I didn't need to fold, straightened books that were already straight, wiped down counters that had been clean that morning. My hands were busy, my mind anything but. Every ring dragged up a memory. The time I left work early because my sister said she might be in trouble, only to find her perfectly fine but in need of a ride. The night I stayed on the phone with my mother until after midnight because she didn't like the silence in her house. The countless emergencies that somehow always ended with me adjusting my life to absorb their chaos. I'd never called it chaos before. I'd called it family. The phone rang again. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the couch and let myself think about something I'd avoided for a long time, what it had cost me to be this person. I'd delayed plans, I'd turned down opportunities that felt too far away, too disruptive, too likely to make me less available. I'd told myself I was being responsible, that this was what love looked like when it grew up. But love isn't supposed to feel like you're slowly disappearing. The room felt unusually quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I could almost hear the script my family expected to play out, my brother finally getting through, his voice tense but relieved, launching straight into the problem, me interrupting with reassurances, with "it's okay, we'll figure it out," with that old familiar warmth that made everything else melt away. I imagined it so clearly I could feel the shape of it in my mouth. And then I imagined something else. What if I didn't? What if, just this once, I let the story unfold without me stepping in to rewrite the ending? The thought was terrifying. It made my chest tighten, not with fear of them, but with fear of myself, of who I might become if I stopped being the solution to everyone else's problems. My phone buzzed again, this time a long message from my brother. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until the screen dimmed, until the urge to react had softened into something more manageable. When I finally read it, it was everything I'd expected and more. He wrote about pressure, about responsibility, about how he was trying his best and didn't have time for drama right now. He said they just needed me to come through like I always did, because that's what family does. Not a single sentence about the things I'd read, not a word about the way they'd spoken about me when they thought I wasn't looking. I put the phone down slowly, like it was fragile. In that moment, I understood the real shape of what was happening. They weren't asking me to help. They were asking me to resume a role they felt entitled to, and the hardest part was admitting that I'd trained them to expect it. For years I'd smoothed over awkwardness with humor, swallowed disappointment with understanding, traded honesty for harmony. Every time I'd chosen peace over truth, I'd made it a little easier for them to believe I didn't need either. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't crying, but I looked different. Older, maybe. Not in the way wrinkles show up, but in the eyes, in the way I was no longer scanning my reflection for approval, no longer asking myself how I should appear to make everyone else comfortable. I realized I was standing at the edge of a version of my life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. A life where my time belonged to me, where I didn't have to justify rest, where I wasn't constantly bracing for the next request. My phone vibrated again in the other room. This time I didn't flinch. I stayed where I was, breathing slowly, feeling the floor beneath my feet like it was something solid I could finally stand on. Later that night, my sister sent another voice note. I still didn't play it. Instead, I typed out a message I had no intention of sending yet, just to see how it felt to form the words. I know what you said about me. I know you removed me. I know you only added me back because you need something. I'm not ready to talk until you acknowledge that. I stared at it for a long time, then I saved it as a draft and closed the app, not because I was afraid of sending it, but because I was learning that my voice didn't have to arrive on demand anymore. I lay in bed that night, with my phone on the dresser instead of under my pillow. It felt wrong, like forgetting something essential, but it also felt strangely peaceful. For the first time, the unanswered calls didn't feel like guilt, they felt like space. I woke up before my alarm, the way you do when something heavy is waiting for you on the other side of sleep. For a moment I didn't remember why my chest felt so tight. Then I saw my phone on the dresser, face down, exactly where I'd left it, and everything rushed back into focus. The messages, the draft, the week of silence that had been a rehearsal for this moment. I didn't touch the phone right away. Instead, I lay there listening to the quiet, the hum of the fridge in the other room, a distant car door slamming somewhere down the street, the small, ordinary sounds of a life that was finally beginning to feel like it belonged to me. I thought about the story my family had always told about me. They said I was strong, independent, the one who had it together. It sounded like praise, but it functioned like a cage. Because strong people aren't supposed to need anything, independent people don't get to feel hurt. The one who has it together isn't allowed to come apart. They'd wrapped my identity in words that made it impossible for me to be human. I got up and made breakfast, something I almost never did on weekdays. I ate slowly, not checking my phone between bites, not scanning the room for distractions. It was a strange kind of ceremony, like I was feeding a version of myself that had been starved for years. When I finally picked up the phone, there were no new messages. That too felt like a test. I opened the draft I'd written the night before. The words looked different in the morning. steadier, less charged with emotion, more like facts than accusations. I read them twice, feeling for the places that still trembled, and then I did something I'd never done before. I edited them. Not to soften the truth, but to claim it. I removed the parts that sounded like apologies. I stripped out the phrases that made space for excuses that hadn't been offered. What remained was quiet, firm, and unmistakably mine. I saw what you wrote about me after you removed me from the group. I was added back without explanation. I'm not able to help with anything until we talk about that honestly. No exclamation points, no emotional pleas, no invitation to rewrite the story. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to understand what I was doing before I did it. All my life, I'd been the narrator of everyone else's crises, the translator, the fixer, the one who turned chaos into something manageable. But my own story had been told in fragments, scattered across other people's needs. Now I was trying to tell it whole. I thought about the years I'd spent making myself smaller in invisible ways, leaving gatherings early because someone needed something, choosing practicality over passion because passion didn't fit into anyone else's plan, measuring my worth and how easily I could be reached. I wondered how many decisions I'd made that weren't really mine. The phone buzzed while I was standing at the sink rinsing my plate. My mother. I didn't answer. She left a message. I didn't listen to it right away either. I took my time, drying my hands, leaning against the counter like I was preparing to lift something heavy. When I finally pressed play, her voice filled the room with its familiar mixture of concern and command. She said they were all under a lot of stress, that I needed to be understanding, that whatever I was feeling, it could wait until after this was dealt with. It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. You can wait. I closed my eyes, letting the words echo. It was the rule I'd lived by without realizing it. My needs deferred, postponed, tucked away until everything else was resolved. Except everything else was never resolved. There was always something new. I sent the message. Not with a dramatic flourish, not with shaking hands, but calmly, like I was setting down something I'd been carrying for too long. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. My brother replied first. His message was long, defensive, full of explanations that didn't quite answer anything. He said they hadn't meant it the way I'd taken it, that everyone was just venting, that I was focusing on the wrong part of the situation. I read it once, then again, and I realized something that made me strangely peaceful. They were still talking to the old version of me, the one who would jump in to smooth over the tension, to reassure them that everything was okay, to take responsibility for the misunderstanding. I didn't respond. My sister sent a shorter message, more cautious. She said she didn't know I'd been hurt that badly, that maybe I was reading too much into things, but she hoped we could all move past it, as if it were a missed call, as if nothing had shifted inside me. The afternoon passed like that, messages arriving in waves, each one circling the same point without ever landing on it. Stress, pressure, timing, family, anything but acknowledgement. By the time the sun began to slide down behind the buildings outside my window, I felt something close to relief, because I wasn't fighting them anymore. I was watching, and in watching, I saw the shape of the story they'd never heard, the one about a woman who had given until giving was the only way she knew how to exist, who had mistaken endurance for love, who had been strong in ways that had nothing to do with being seen. I typed a second message, not in anger, not in defense, but in truth. I'm not asking for perfection, I'm asking for honesty. Please tell me why I was removed, and what was said about me without pretending it didn't happen. This time, when I hit send, I didn't feel afraid. I felt present. The typing bubble hovered for a long time after my last message. Long enough that I brewed tea I didn't really want. Long enough that the sky outside dimmed into that in-between shade where you can't tell if the day is ending or the night is arriving early. I watched that tiny moving shape on my screen, the way you watch someone behind a closed door, aware that something is happening, unable to hear the words, bracing for the sound when it finally opens. When the bubble vanished, I felt the absence more sharply than I'd felt any of the messages before. Minutes passed, then my sister finally replied. It wasn't long, it wasn't careful, it was blunt in a way I'd never heard from her before. She said they were frustrated with me, that they felt like I'd outgrown the family, that when I talked about my plans, it made them feel judged. She said they'd removed me from the group because it was easier to talk without feeling like I was silently evaluating everyone. Silently evaluating. I read the phrase again and again, trying to locate the version of myself they were describing. The one who sat in judgment instead of sitting in love. The one who thought she was better instead of just tired. My brother followed with his own message, longer, less composed. He admitted they'd been talking about me behind my back. He said things had gotten heated, that people said things they didn't mean, that it had spiraled, but there was no "I'm sorry," not yet. What there was explanation, the kind that doesn't soften the truth so much as wrap it in enough words that you might miss how sharp it still is. I set the phone down and leaned my forehead against the cool surface of the table. For a moment I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the clarity was almost dizzying. They hadn't been angry at me. They'd been uncomfortable with the version of me that was no longer small. They'd removed me not because I was absent, but because I was present in ways they didn't know how to manage, talking about my life, my ambitions, my boundaries, like those things were allowed to exist alongside theirs. And instead of telling me that, instead of risking an honest conversation, they'd erased me. I picked the phone back up, hands steadier than I expected, and typed slowly. I wasn't evaluating you. I was finally including myself. The words felt strange, like a language I was just beginning to speak. My mother replied next. Her message was the longest of all, and the hardest to read. She said families say things they don't mean when they're stressed. She said I needed to remember that everyone was struggling. She said she wished I'd just spoken up sooner, instead of letting things get this far. There it was, the pivot. The subtle shift that turns the spotlight away from what had been done to me and back onto what I should have done differently. I felt something loosen in my chest then. Not pain, but recognition. This was the pattern. They could talk about my impact, my responsibility, my timing, but they couldn't quite say, "We hurt you." I stood up and walked around my apartment, touching things that had become familiar in a new way over the past few days. The chair where I'd sat ignoring calls, the window where I'd watched the world go on without me, the table where I'd written messages I never thought I'd have the courage to send. This was my space, my life. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a waiting room. When I came back to the phone, I typed again. I didn't speak up because I didn't know there was something to speak up about. I was removed without explanation. I found out what you thought of me by accident. This time the typing bubble reappeared almost immediately. My brother wrote, then deleted, wrote again. The message that finally arrived was shorter than all the others. He said he was sorry, just that. No explanation, no conditions, no but. It was the first time in the entire exchange that someone had spoken to the version of me who existed now. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the word settle, sorry. It didn't erase the week of silence, or the messages I couldn't unsee. It didn't rewind the moment I realized I was valued more for what I provided than for who I was. But it changed the shape of the room I was standing in. I replied, "Thank you for saying that. Not it's okay, not I understand, not don't worry about it, just thank you." The conversation didn't end there. It continued in fits and starts, my sister softening, my mother circling back with something that sounded closer to regret than defense. But something fundamental had already shifted. They were no longer talking at me. They were finally talking with me. And even then, I knew better than to believe the story was over. Apologies don't rewrite habits. Understanding doesn't erase years of expectation. What had happened between us was deeper than a bad week or a few careless messages. It was about how easily love can turn into entitlement when no one ever says no. I put my phone down when the messages slowed, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I felt complete in a way I hadn't before. The truth doesn't always apologize. Sometimes it just stands there, waiting to see who is willing to meet it. The messages slowed until they stopped. Not with a neat ending, not with closure wrapped in a bow, but with that quiet lull that comes after something important has been said and nobody knows how to be normal again. I didn't rush to fill it. That was new. In the days that followed, I began to notice how different my life felt when I wasn't tethered to my phone like an invisible cord. Mornings unfolded without the familiar pressure of checking who needed me before I even needed myself. I walked to work with my head up instead of angled toward a glowing screen. I caught myself humming while I washed dishes, not because I was happy in any loud way, but because I wasn't bracing for interruption. My family didn't disappear. They were still there in quieter forms, occasional messages, a few cautious calls, but the urgency was gone. The sense that everything would collapse if I didn't step in had loosened its grip. I understood then that boundaries aren't walls. their breathing room. One afternoon my brother called again. This time I answered. His voice sounded different, not frantic, not entitled, just unsure. He asked how I was doing, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. No one in my family had ever asked me that without an agenda attached, so I told him the truth. I said I was learning how to listen to myself. I said I didn't know exactly what I wanted yet, but I knew I didn't want to disappear into everyone else's life anymore. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought we'd lost the connection. Then he said he didn't realize how much pressure he'd put on me. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't poetic, but it was real, and I felt something close to grief for the years it had taken to arrive there. Later that night, I scrolled back through the family chat, not to punish myself, but to understand what I'd survived. The old messages read differently now. Where I'd once seen myself as the helper, I now saw the pattern of expectations forming around me, like a shape I'd been poured into without consent. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Free in a quiet, careful way, the way you are when you finally put down something heavy and realize you don't have to pick it back up just because you've always carried it. Weeks passed. My sister sent photos again, but now they came with questions instead of assumptions. My mother called to talk instead of to unload. My brother asked for advice once, and when I said I couldn't help that week, he didn't push. The world didn't end. That was the revelation no one prepares you for. You don't have to be indispensable to be loved. You just have to be present in a way that doesn't erase you. One evening I sat alone on my balcony watching the sky soften into pink and gold, the city below folding itself into night. My phone was inside, untouched, quiet. I thought about the woman I'd been at the start of all this, counting the days of silence, wondering what she'd done wrong, believing that being removed from a chat was the same as being removed from a family. She hadn't known yet that silence can be an invitation, not to beg, but to listen. I picked up my phone and typed one last message into the family group. I love you. I'm still here, but I'm here as myself now. Then I put the phone down and went back outside, letting the cool air settle around me like a promise I intended to keep. For the first time in a very long time, my life didn't feel like something I was constantly explaining. It felt like something I was finally living.